There's a question that tends to surface the moment you read seriously about prison labor, concentration camps, gulags, any system that puts captive people to work. And it's this: if you're extracting labor from human beings, why starve them? Why withhold medicine, ignore sanitation, let typhus and dysentery move through the barracks unchecked? You are, by any visible logic, destroying the asset that generates your value. A factory owner who lets his machines rust on purpose would be considered insane. So either everyone running these systems was insane, which is a comforting story and a false one, or we've misunderstood what the system was for. It's the second one. And the real answer is colder than any contradiction, because once you see the logic, it's perfectly coherent. It just isn't the logic you assumed. Let me lay out three distinct mechanisms. They sometimes ran separately and sometimes ran together, and telling them apart is most of the work. The first, in some systems, death was not a failure of the labor program. It was the goal of it. The German term, and I'll put it in here, writing here so I don't mispronounce, it means extermination through labor. This wasn't an after-the-fact description coined by historians. It was understood policy. The clearest case is the IG Farben synthetic rubber plant built alongside Auschwitz, the camp sometimes called Monowitz or Auschwitz III. Prisoners were leased out as labor to a private chemical corporation. Estimates of the average survival time for a worker there run around 3 to 4 months. That number wasn't a tragedy the planners were trying to fix. It was the model. You take a person you have already condemned, you extract whatever labor you can wring out of them before they collapse. And the collapse is on schedule. The work and the unaliving were the same act. So when you ask why they didn't keep those workers healthy, they weren't workers in the sense you mean. They were people being unalived slowly, and the slowness was monetized. The second mechanism is the one I'd ask you to really hold on to, because it's the one that explains the widest range of cases and is pure economics. A captive worker is only worth keeping alive if replacing them costs something. Let me put two systems side by side because the contrast is the whole lesson. In the American South, an enslaved person was a capital asset. They were bought at a price, insured against death, used as collateral for loans, listed on estates. And because of that, enslavers, out of naked financial self-interest, not a shred of mercy, had reason to keep enslaved people alive and functional. You don't burn money. The brutality was constant, but outright disposal made no economic sense because disposal meant writing off an expensive asset. Now hold that next to a system fed by conquered populations, by mass political arrests, by racial roundups. In those systems, a new body arrives at the gate for free, and it arrives endlessly. There's no purchase price. There's no insurance. There's no replacement cost. And the instant the replacement cost hits zero, every reason to preserve the individual in front of you evaporates with it. You do not service equipment you can pick up off the floor for nothing. You run it until it stops, and you reach for the next one. They didn't keep workers healthy because health is an investment. An investment only makes sense when replacement is expensive. The supply was treated as infinite, so each unit of it was treated as worthless. That's not a contradiction. That's a market behaving exactly the way a market behaves when a resource is free. The third mechanism is the one people miss most because it breaks the assumption that these systems were even trying to be productive, because they frequently were not. Soviet gulag labor, studied closely, was often economically irrational, inefficiently organized, poorly equipped, sometimes producing less value than it consumed. The camps lost money. So if you weren't running them for output, what were you running them for? The real product was political. Disappear the people you've labeled enemies. Terrorize the population that's still free into silence and obedience. Demonstrate continuously and visibly what the state can do to a person. And here the starvation and disease stop looking like neglect and start looking like instruments. Because a prisoner who is starving, sick, and freezing is a prisoner who cannot organize, cannot resist, and cannot run. The degradation isn't a breakdown of the system. The degradation is the system performing its actual function. I wanted to know whether it's about cruelty, whether someone takes pleasure in the suffering. That's real, and I won't soften it. But it's not the engine. It's the permission structure. A system built to degrade human beings needs people willing to degrade them. So it selects for cruelty, rewards it, promotes it. The sadism is fed by the machine. It doesn't build the machine. Mistaking the two lets you believe this was about uniquely evil individuals, when the more frightening truth is that the structure would generate the same outcomes with fairly ordinary people slotted into the roles. Did they want the majority dead? For the extermination through labor systems, yes, literally. Death was the destination and labor was the road. For the others, death wasn't always the explicit aim, but it was fully accepted cost because the supply was infinite and the individual was worthless. That's the core of it. That's the answer underneath the other answers. Everything bends around the moment a human life is assigned a replacement cost of 0. There's one more layer, and it's the ugliest because it's circular. These systems began by declaring their victims less than human. Then they put those victims in conditions of filth, starvation, and disease. And those conditions produced exactly the broken, degraded, suffering human beings the ideology had described. The system manufactured the evidence for its own lie, then pointed at that evidence to justify continuing. The starvation didn't contradict the dehumanization, it completed it. But health was never the expected state of someone whose labor what you actually valued, it was the tell. Fed, treated, sheltered workers are what you find when someone wanted the work done and needed the worker to keep doing it. Starvation, disease, and abandonment are what you find when the work was a cover, an instrument, or an afterthought. And the real objective was something else entirely. You can read the goal directly off the bodies. That's the lesson, and it's the part worth carrying out of this. When you find a system that destroys the people working inside it, don't ask why it's failing to keep them alive. Ask what it was actually built to produce. The answer is almost never the thing it claimed. I'm Lil, and this is Lil Unfiltered.